So, hello. Я хотел на русском начать, прошу прощения. А, Всем здравствуйте, меня зовут Кирилл Ермолин-Луговской. Я сокуратор независимого пространства Ось 7 в Самаре. И сегодня мы с Лерой Конончук, теоретиком искусства и исследователем, и Колей Нашхуновым, философом и квир-исследователем, поговорим с одним из самых известных историков искусства и художественных критиков 21 века, преподавателем факультета искусства, кино и визуальных исследователей Гарвардского университета, автором огромного количества статей и особенно книг, таких как «Американское искусство» с 1945 года, изданное в оригинале издательством Famous and Hudson, на русском вышел в издательстве Эдмаргина. После искусства издательство Принстонского университета, а на русском у VC Пресс. «Наследие и долг», непереведенная книжка на русский язык, но изданная MIT Пресс, «Свойства искусства» Принстонского университета, а также один из авторов и соредакторов одной из важнейших книжек по искусству «Искусство 1900 года». Собственно говоря, мы сегодня говорим с Дэвидом Джозелитом. Вот, небольшое предисловие, да, при том, что разрыв между российским и американским контекстом огромный для нас, как для маленького независимого пространства в Самаре, очень важно выстраивать связи и вести диалог со всеми и с иностранными коллегами в том числе. И идея этой встречи родилась после того, как я прочитал статью Дэвида и Памелы Эмли «6 позиций после второй победы Трампа», где я нашел огромное количество схожих позиций, схожих интересных вещей в американском контексте и российском контексте. Но сегодня мы не будем обсуждать саму статью, мы больше поделимся ощущениями о том, в каком положении находится российское и американское современное искусство сегодня. И я надеюсь, что эта беседа поможет нам осознать себя в мире, как я красиво написал, где правая политика одерживает верх, и соотнести наши позиции, понимая, что между нами гораздо больше общего, чем мы предполагаем. Вот. Я на русском поблагодарю Леру и Колю за то, что они согласились прийти на эту встречу, за то, что они помогали в организации в целом, помогали в этом диалоге. Да, so I gonna switch in English, and my name is Kirill Ermonilgovskoy. I'm a co-curator of Independent Artist Run Space, Samara Contemporary Art Periphery, me, in Samara in Russia. And today we will speak with Lera Kononchuk. Lera Kononchuk and I and Kolya Nakhshunov will speak with one of the most well-known art historians and critic in 21st century, David Joselit. He's a professor of art, film, and visual studies at Harvard University, and author of many important articles and books, such as American Art Science 1945, After Art, Heritage and Depth, Art Properties, and one of co-authors of one of the important book about art science 1900. Even though the gap between the Russian and American context is quite big, it's really important for us as a small independent artist-run space in Samara to build a connection between us. Yeah, sorry. To build connections and keep the conversation going. The idea for this meeting come to me after reading an article by David Joselit and Pamela M. Lee in October magazine, Six Proposition after Trump's second victory. A lot of what they wrote felt very relevant for what's happening in Russia today. But we are not going to discuss the article itself. Instead, we are talk about the situation of contemporary art in Russia and America over the past few years. I hope this conversation help us understand where we stand in a world where the right-wing politics are gaining influence, and also help us see what we might have more in common when we think. So huge thanks to David what he come to us and joining this conversation. Thank you. I try to introduce more clearly when okay. Lera, I
It's a
give you the word.
pleasure.
Sorry.
A pleasure to be here.
Little,
Thank
little,
you.
little mix.
Yeah.
Lera?
First and foremost, thanks, Kirill and Ilya, for inviting me and Kolya to this conversation. We're really excited to do that, and really happy to have you, David, as part of this conversation. And we really have lots and lots of questions to address you, but we'll keep our time limits, obviously. We thought a lot about what to start with, but maybe the first ground would be that both Russia and the US are kind of empires. So my
Mhm.
first question would spring off this idea, and well, we are you and us are representative of the Russian and American art worlds, and the problem is that we find ourselves in a moment when dialogue between our contexts is profoundly strained. And well, that's a great thing that Kirill and Ilya organized this conversation. Moreover, the ongoing war has made collaboration between Russian and the US, as well the European cultural practitioners, nearly impossible. All ongoing wars are aggravating encapsulation of national context that we saw developing during COVID, bubbling up, so to say. And yet, despite this self-enclosure, the art field continues to gravitate toward international cooperation and diversity, and that's the basis. But the forms that this collaboration takes often mirror state agendas, which are more about cultural diplomacy and soft power rather than anything else. And that's the thing that kind of gets my mind busy, or has been getting my mind busy for some time. So globally, the most powerful interpretive and critical framework today is the decolonial perspective, obviously. But interestingly, and I will get a bit of a context for Russia, in Russia, this perspective, I mean, the decolonial one, is also taken up almost by necessity, but it is sharpened not towards self-reflection as a former empire still behaving as an empire, but primarily toward resistant Western imperialism. So we also have this decolonial attitude, but it is not directed towards being self-critical towards our own empirical past, but towards Western imperialism. In a nutshell, in recent years, Russia's major cultural institutions, which once were closely aligned with Western frameworks, have redirected their attention towards artistic and intellectual traditions of the global South. So, partly in response to state-driven narratives about forming an alternative to American imperialism, and partly because this is the only chance to not get stuck in our own bubble. So we only have the chance to, get tight connections to the countries outside the Western world. And this has led to greater visibility of projects from African, Latin American, and Asian countries in Russia. And I would say a broader interest in non-Western art and epistemologies, which I welcome very much because we really limited ourselves while trying to catch up with the Western art world. And these other perspectives really broaden our horizons. But I think we here always need to be aware that this goes hand in hand with state cultural diplomacy as well. So we're both complicit with making all these connections and trying to make it our own way by introducing public to important systems of knowledge, ways of thinking, and seeing the world outside of the world that we get used to. So the question would be, well, US foreign cultural diplomacy played a tremendous role in shaping the landscape of at least post-war art. So do you think that contemporary foreign policy in the US continues to exert a comparable influence on artistic production today? And the second question is, how does the decolonial framework adopted by the US institutions more or less cope with today's Republican, well, this bubbling up policy?
Thanks, Lera. That a lot of really interesting um, things in there, and it's very interesting to me to hear about the reorientation in the Russian art world toward the global South. That is something that I wasn't aware of. So I'm going to respond to your questions and some of the things that you said that you didn't specifically ask question-wise. Um, First of all, I think the question of soft power and culture is incredibly interesting. And I was recently, like this fall, I participated in a conference in Saudi Arabia, which is conducting a really aggressive soft power cultural program, despite the fact that there remain a lot of illiberal dimensions to their government, but also they're trying to build a tourist industry based on culture that in a place where one can't drink alcohol, which, as trivial as that may sound for tourism, it's um, it's a kind of impediment. And also there isn't really um, there aren't long-standing urban public cultural spaces in a city like Riyadh in the way that there are in other tourist places. Now, why am I talking about Saudi Arabia? Because I think that one of the things I've tried to study in Heritage and Debt and other works of mine is how um, there is a way in which um, economies that are trying to move from extraction to a post-industrial or information economy, which Saudi is trying to do, use and develop soft power in culture. We've seen it in the Emirates and in Qatar, etc. So I think that there's a kind of stage in some ways when soft power is important. One of those other stages, I mean, I'm going to sort of move around in a lot of the interesting work that ideas that you presented, and then hopefully focus on the questions more specifically. But I think when you bring up the question of empire, soft power has traditionally been important to empires, right? And Russia and the US is also an interesting situation because it is a post-colony, right? I mean, it was a colonial holding, and that acts in a neo-imperial way, um, externally, internationally, but whose nation state was founded on an act of internal colonization of indigenous lands and also European colonial lands. So the US was in a very strange cultural position in the 20th century after World War II, the moment that you mentioned as the kind of initiation of the great soft power. Um, I don't say great in the sense of praise, but the large effort at creating soft power internationally in the US. And I've been thinking recently that it has a lot to do with what a post-colonial imperial country, that paradox, right, of being a post-colony on the one hand. So European culture was sort of it wasn't okay to draw on European culture because that was in a way what the US had to distinguish itself from. And yet it didn't have its own European identity. And so it drew from indigenous forms to some degree. And also it drew on a kind of post-consumer American popular culture that was a product specific to the US. So soft power was really important in that moment of assessing, um, uh, asserting a kind of global profile for a nation that really, had been considered a sort of derivative culture to Europe for much of its previous existence. But soft power, to get now to more your specific question, I think it's pretty clear that Trump is not interested in soft power, and he's pulled away. He has eliminated many of the levers that are used to produce it globally, including foreign aid, which has been drastically reduced, and all kinds of the Voice of America, international communications networks. So I think that the people who are running the United States currently believe that soft power is not a form of power. And it's interesting because I feel personally that this is going to be, um, I don't know, it's going to have bad effects in the long term for the United States because our country is making it clear that we don't see any obligation outside of our own hard power. And so one of the problems of hard power, or pardon me, of failing to pursue or no longer pursuing soft power is that hard power has become the kind of norm in the US. And I was just reading this morning quite another maybe parallel with the Russian situation is that, I don't know if you've been following this, but there's been a kind of buildup of militarization in around Venezuela, um, which, is in the United States, the Latin American sphere of influence, or whatever you want to call it, or at least that's what I think Trump is still thinking. Um, and the excuse is to stop drugs from coming into the United States. But um, it's a very aggressive set of actions, as are, I don't know if this is well known in Russia, but the National Guard, again, under the excuse of immigration, illegal immigration, has been sent to various American cities. And Trump has also said that he might be interested in sending the military into American cities. So there is this, I would say there is a kind of collapse of soft power and um, a really frightening amplification of hard power, military power, both internationally and within the US, but not so much with traditional opponents such as the Soviet Union, I mean, Soviet Union, Russia, or China. I think the Cold War um, collapsing and the US sort of neo-imperial assertion of world power also collapsing, in my view, has meant that the world is being reordered along the lines that you're talking about. It's fascinating that the Russian cultural world is focusing on the global South. I don't think that that's happening in the US at the moment, or at least um, not in ways that I can see. I think that one of the now to so cultural diplomacy, I would say, has collapsed in the face of a preference for military power, a really kind of old-fashioned idea of, you know, um, hyper uh, hyper assertion of the nation state. Now, to get to the decolonial framework, basically the education policies that um, Trump has used have demonized anything along the lines of a decolonial position as diversity or critical race theory, et cetera, even though those things are different. I think they don't even use the term decolonial. I don't think they have quite, gotten there on that one. But what it represents is what they're firmly against. Now, I don't think that that has necessarily changed how it operates in the American Academy. I mean, I don't know anyone who's really changed their teaching, and those ideas are only more important at the moment. So I think at the moment, I don't believe that people feel, by people, I mean um, uh, academics, feel under threat about teaching what they want to teach, depending on the institution they're in. But there's variation on that. Um, and there's also a way in which student anger at ideas that they don't want to hear about is what generates the kind of political opposition. It's less a kind of, in a way, they find their opportunities through that kind of thing. I know this is a long answer. I'll just say a few more words. I also think what is interesting about this question, and I think you referred to this in another context, is that what the current authoritarian leaning or authoritarian government of the Trump administration is doing is taking civil rights strategies, um, anti-discrimination strategies, and weaponizing them against the left. And this is most clearly done with their dialogue around anti-Semitism. And I just have to say that I am Jewish and don't condone anti-Semitism. But the way that the Trump administration has argued that universities in the US and the art world, et cetera, are rife with anti-Semitism is derived from a kind of civil rights set of arguments. But in order to destroy the values that civil rights stood for. So it's a very kind of clever strategy in a certain way because they are appropriating, even though they demonize the left, they are appropriating many of the strategies of the left and changing their direction. Um, so a decolonial theory would be dangerous to that kind of set of, tactics. I think I'll stop there because I've said quite a lot. But that was a great, thank you for that wonderful configuration.
Thanks a lot. Um, well, since you brought up the topic of the universities, it is really close to our hearts, both me and Kolya. So I'd want to again maybe give out a bit of a context. So, well, on the topic of the universities. Well, in Russia now, well, governmental pressure on universities and the educational sector uh, more broadly has reached, well, an unprecedented level now. So departments are being downsized or restructured. Small independent institutions such as Basel Institute, which was really important to us, well, are shutting down, and faculty increasingly face political scrutiny. Well, in Russia, the state strive to eliminate so-called Western critical theories, which are perceived as Western. I mean, feminism, gender studies, even political science, well, not speaking about decolonial studies, has resulted in persecution of instructors. Many are now designated as foreign agents and pushed into exile. Um, and well, there are kind of mounting constraints on students' curricular choices and forms of self-organization. What I wanted to say, well, you said that generally there is no impact for change within the universities in terms of the curricula, but well, after Trump's re-election, well, US universities, as I assume, also encountered various forms of political interference of some sort. So, but how do still scholars and students continue to defend their intellectual autonomy and sustain work in the fields under, well, well, under pressure? And the other, well, follow-up question, which is of a more personal touch. Well, in arts properties, well, you dedicate the book to your students, which struck me as a deeply meaningful gesture. Well, could you speak about why you choose this dedication? So, what role do students play in shaping your thinking, and how do you understand the relationship that forms between a professor and the students today? So that's it.
Thank you for that. And I'll answer that question first because that's more easier to answer quickly. Well, that book was conceived based on a seminar that I taught during the pandemic. And sometimes teaching on Zoom was really bad, but sometimes it created a kind of intimacy that was really wonderful. And so this was a very special seminar where the students had wanted to focus in on Foucault and some thinkers that grow out of him. And um, it just became this really intimate, amazing discussion. And I conceived of the book kind of out of the discussions we were having. It doesn't sort of record those discussions, but it comes out of them. And so in this sense, I really literally felt a debt to them as my interlocutors in this book. But in general, I mean, teaching is amazing because as we are in dialogue now, you think differently when you're in dialogue than you do as an individual. And that's why I don't think that AI or, all these kinds of threats that people feel that face-to-face education will um, is somehow under threat. I think it may be, but I don't think there's really a substitute for that. So autonomy in the U I probably spoke in the university in the US. I probably spoke too quickly because I mean, being at the elite university that I am in a very progressive state and city in the United States, um, they have been very careful not to make explicit limits to how faculty can teach. And there probably have been situations where either directly or indirectly that has happened. But, the education system is very, like everything in the US, it's very decentralized and very neoliberalized. So even public education is often, um, you know, largely funded by donations. Private universities are largely funded by private endowments and donations. And so the susceptibilities are different from place to place. Some public universities are supervised by state governments, provincial governments, and they get they can have direct pressure and effects, such as in Florida, where Ron DeSantis, the governor of that state, um, changed the trustees of the university, and that had an immediate effect. So I think I spoke too quickly about there not being an effect in classroom, but what what I don't know if this news registered or was important in Russia, but what Trump has done is defunded um, universities, even though um, no university is fully funded by the federal government. Grants for science research and also other kinds of research or services are contracted with universities. So the government, it turns out, has huge control over universities, even though they don't directly fund them. So they stopped or reduced that funding. Harvard actually sued the government and won, so some of it's coming back. But um, that has had an enormous effect. And it's also created a kind of self-censorship within the institutions. So even though I'm not told what to teach or what not to teach, I don't personally feel afraid to teach what I want to, but I can imagine that other colleagues might. And also, the fact of reducing this funding has meant that many universities are, including Harvard, are reducing the number of graduate students they admit. Our graduate programs across the board were reduced by between 60 and 75%. So that's two-thirds in 1 year. I mean, it's almost a kind of, um, you know, desecration, destruction of our capacity as a research university, and we're the richest university in the world. So the as is often the case in the US, a certain kind of effect comes through starving things of funding, and then the consequences can be different, in different places, and they have been. But the overall effect is exactly what you're saying, a reduction of academia, um, a reduction of capacity to do scientific research, which is really, even though I'm a humanist and not a scientist, it is scary to think that, science research is being defunded, in terms of just well-being and the stature of American academia in general. Um, and one final thing I'll say before handing back to you is that the government has also used another lever that they have, which is granting visas to foreign students. Harvard, like many US universities, um, serves many, many, many foreign students. They're from all over the world, and um, there's a large proportion of graduate students and a smaller but still significant portion of the undergraduate students. And they've made getting visas much more difficult and threatened us with withdrawing our capacity to grant visas, or not to grant them, but to sponsor them, or we're not allowed to be the sponsors for visas. I'm not quite sure what the legal thing is, but you get the point. And so they've used all of these different levers to control universities. So of course, the people in charge, the presidents, the trustees, the deans, they still believe in free speech, etc. But of course, they're working in a context where everything is working against them, and everyone is afraid of what will be the next pretext for reducing funding or some other punitive legal action.
Yeah, David, thank you. In Russia, the situation is kind of different because in Russia, most universities are state. I mean, they are state funded, while in the USA, yeah, the situation is quite different. But I'd prefer to return uh, a little bit back to art because
Mhm.
academy and the art sphere are quite close. And for me, when we talk about Russian contemporary art in the context of war, as well if we talk about Russian academia
Mhm.
um, in the context of war, the topic of responsibility and irresponsibility immediately comes to mind. Say, this is the most obvious. And we can start with, I think we can start here with the unspoken motto of Russian contemporary art in the early 2020s, love and corruption. Of course, this motto emerged, as I remember, from the work of participants of the second triennial of Russian contemporary art and can be apparently understood literally. Love and corruption. Corruption is more or less understandable since Russia is one of the most corrupt countries according to different ratings, while love is more complicated. In this context, love can be understood as neoliberal love, neoliberal sentiment, where the form exceeds the content. Such love and corruption go well together. So oligarchs and patrons and mecenates love attractive artists. They sleep with them and promote them in the art world at the same time. And exactly this fundamentally neoliberal logic means that everyone only cares about their wallets and appearances. And that annoys me the most. Because nowadays, during the real hot war, when we go to exhibitions, the audience looks like it's from Vanity Fair or the Hunger Games. When the war broke out, Russian-Ukrainian war, basically no one cared. Yes, one could talk endlessly about how shocked everyone was, but the industry adapted. It took the position that it was better to remain silent and so save itself. However, the paradox is that when you remain silent, to my mind, when you allow yourself to be silenced or agree to restrictions, you are no longer who you are before. You recognize your face in this ugly mirror, some kind of a mirror, yeah. And what can you say? I mean, what do you think about this topic, the topic of responsibility and irresponsibility? And are there any similar examples in American art in the Trump era? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I've been, you know, personally, artists and curators that I know, though I don't know as many of the trustees. Again, all of the museums are run by private wealth. Um, you know, they're anti-Trump, but you wouldn't, I don't think you'd really know it by looking at the art world. And I think so it's a confusing, it's a very confusing situation because I think that the US, well, no offense, this might sound crude, but I think the awareness of an oligarchical situation has been longer and more explicit in Russia than it has in the US, where, there's this fantasy in the US that everyone's in the middle class, that we're all sort of the same on some level. But of course, the income, the gap in income has gotten worse and worse. And we basically are functioning, I think, as an oligarchy. You can give unlimited money to elections. Money is essential to win elections. Um, you saw with Elon Musk and the entire Silicon Valley group of billionaires, not exactly supporting, well, Elon Musk supported Trump, but the others like Bezos and Zuckerberg, um, you know, they don't they don't come out against him, and they're running the biggest media companies in the country, if not the world, and they have huge amounts of capital, and nothing happens with the politicians anymore. There's no, you know, our government is more or less, at a logjam. So I think we're working under a kind of unacknowledged oligarchical model. And the art world, as you remarked with regard to Russia, is deeply connected to oligarchy because those are their patrons. But I've also been hearing sort of against that current, which is crude, what I just said, and simplistic on some levels, but I don't think it's untrue. Um, Against that current, the art market here is not doing so well. And there's been a kind of consolidation in the very large galleries, like Hauser and Wirth, David Zwirner, Gagosian, and a lot of smaller galleries have closed. And I've heard from artists. I heard from one artist who I won't name him, but he had a one-person show at the Whitney Museum. So this is someone with a high-profile career, but he works in kind of intermediate, largely sculptural work. And he said that he's not selling anything and no one he knows is selling anything. So on the one hand, you have this model of the art world as beholden to what I'm just going to call an American oligarchy. Um, and on the other, they're no longer really getting the support maybe that they once were. And so I think I think we might be in a kind of strange place where maybe things are about to change, but I can't really say exactly what that is. I can say, based on some of the questions that Creel sent me in advance, that one of the things I've been really interested in are artists who are there are a group of artists working out of disability studies in New York that I'm very Konstantina Zavitsanos is one, Park MacArthur. Um, they're a group of artists who precisely are not interested in autonomy, who are thinking about relation and dependence, and also projects that aren't so easily commodified or aren't even whole things necessarily. And so I feel like there is a world of really interesting thinking and making of art that's happening in the US. I mean, I mostly know what's happening in New York, where I mostly live, but I'm sure there are other worlds elsewhere. I mean, I know there are, but it's it's hard to see what it's gonna lead to, you know, because the art world is still completely dependent upon philanthropy. Even I was on the board of Artist Space, which is a great small institution in New York that's been going since the 70s. And um, at a certain point, we had no choice but to go to the philanthropic model that every other museum in the United States does. I mean, it doesn't need as much money, so the people giving money are not as directive in terms of their values, et cetera. But there just isn't another model that people have pursued in this country that I'm aware of, or at least in New York. Now, I mean, one of the things that Creel said in his and I know that your group is a kind of self-organized group. I don't know that that's quite happened yet in the US. Again, I'm sure there are examples. Um, but in New York, which has for so long been, you know, um, a scene that's driven by the market and even the non-market, there's was so much money sloshing around that even the parts of the scene that aren't directly dependent on the market, we're benefiting from, the money that circulates in the art world. Um, so I don't know. I mean, it could be an exciting time or it could be a really depressing time, It's it's certainly depressing and there are some exciting things going on, but it's hard to know what it's going to look like, in 5 years or something like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I can only agree with you because those who accuse the contemporary art industry in Russia, I should stress this contemporary art industry in Russia, but maybe in the USA also, those who accuse them, the collectors, the curators, the institutions, of course, of supporting war and fascism, often fail to recognize that it has already become so emasculated and narcissistic. It covered up harassment and institutional violence years before, not only now. And everyone remains silent. I mean, uh, it reminds me an anecdote from the Nazi era. Its hero says, "When they came for Jews, I remained silent. When they came for the gay people, I remained silent. When they came for me, no one stood up for me." And the situation, as well as I'm acquainted in the USA, is quite similar because now they came for supporters and defenders of Palestine, and then they came to civic rights activists and so on. And in Russia, this mechanism works right now. And when the first political dismissals and persecutions took place before 2020s, everyone remained silent. And when exhibitions were turned down due to so-called political reasons, everyone remained silent too. I'm not saying that each of us is to blame for this, for remaining silent. Rather, I'm talking about a general tendency towards irresponsibility and a particular desire to entertain oneself and totally relax at all costs. And as I see, art is not about entertainment only. It's about being a killjoy and exposing
Mhm.
the uncomfortable topics. We must not just sit down and sprinkle ashes on our heads. We must demonstrate through our art and our actions how demotivated and devastated we are. And after all, the war is being waged against us too. Here in Russian territory, we are vulnerable. We are the civilian population also. We were dragged into this war against our will, and now we are being used as bargaining chips. Our own country has taken us hostage. Like all civilians, we need to make our suffering and pain visible. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that there were 7 million people, including me, who marched a few weeks ago against Trump. So I feel like there still is public space for protests, but I'm not sure. And there are artists like Amy Sherald, who I don't know if you've heard of her. She's a portrait painter, an interesting artist. Not, I don't know that she's going to change the world, but she did the official portrait of Michelle Obama. And she was having an exhibition in Washington at one of the Smithsonian Institution, at one of the museums that Trump had, wanted to revise the narratives of the museum, talk about decolonial, to sort of erase any mention of slavery or indigenous genocide, etc. So she canceled her show in Washington. So, I mean, I don't know. I think there's a way. I don't know how you all feel about this and how you deal with it, but there's a way in the US where I think people just feel that the government, it's impossible, aside from our next election, which might put the opposition into power in some parts of the Congress, that there really isn't a point of intervention. And you have to work against this sort of sense of real pessimism. And so on that level, I don't think that artists have been, as a group, standing up publicly in the way one might have wanted or hoped. But I do think they remain important in terms of the sort of alternate affective worlds and sets of relations that they model. It just one is always worried, like, is that enough? I mean, is that really, when you talk about responsibility, Kolya, it's something I think about a lot too. And it's really hard to know. I guess it's a choice that everyone has to make for themselves. But then again, that's a problem too, right? I mean, this kind of privatization of responsibility. But we've been so trained in this country to think of the individual as the unit of everything, you know, that I think it's very hard to have the imagination to move out of that. And that's where I feel like the modeling that artists can do of different forms of relationality, different forms of dependence, even though that's in a very small kind of cultural zone, it creates possibilities. And I guess I just have to believe that that is, important and worth doing. But it's hard not to feel very pessimistic for sure.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. My question is next one. For me, like for artist and for curator of independent or trans space, really important the question about responsibility uh, too, because after 2022, we like artists faced it with one of the biggest tragedy. I don't know how to describe this feeling. It's many of bad words come to my head. Um, yeah, and in Samara in 2022, we started work with our independent artist One Space. Like it was only one choice to make an exhibition in space of freedom. I don't know, a space of independent. Because big museums, I don't know, big museums like private or governments would have a relation with governments. Yeah, they all have relation with government because they opened by oligarchies and they have this relation with government. And of course, we like an artist try to separate ourselves from government and try to build something without any uh, government pressure and so on. Yeah, and from my question is, right now after Trump's second victory, how important these independent spaces, artist run spaces, and so on, in New York or in USA, and like because for Russian context, they are really important. Like we have this conversation in small Samara's artist run space, and we can't have it in can have it, but we can't have it in Garage or Tretyakov Gallery or Pushkin's Museum or something like this, because this fast like build this fast build these connections and independent from government is more important to have these links and so on. And yeah, probably my question is more about artist run spaces and independent spaces and so on with no founding, with just with their forces of artists or curators or someone else. Yeah, what do you think about these spaces and how they important for American context?
Yeah, I think those spaces are amazing. And I think that, well, I may just not be aware of that level of activity as much as others, but the ones I'm aware of aren't fully independent in the sense, as I said before, they often have a fundraising model that is on a kind of lower level, lower number, but equivalent to larger institutions. But I do think what's really important, so in New York, there are places like Artist Space. There are certain commercial galleries actually that are really small that almost function like artist spaces. Um, and then I think what's important here is probably things that maybe aren't um, formalized into spaces, but groups in dialogue. Um, like the group of artists that I mentioned before who are working through, who are a group of friends who sometimes work together but don't necessarily have a space, but are putting forward a kind of again a program that not a program but um a set of projects that are interrelated, that are really about dependency and not autonomy, that are trying to question how the artwork becomes a thing, not just because of its commodity status, but because to try to live in a kind of um, doubt and relation um, with kind of, you know, uh, a bad situation with destruction on some level. I mean, I've been really interested in critical theories like that are thinking about not about revolution, not about changing the world in one heroic gesture, but in how one lives with, for instance, environmental destruction and decay. Not in the sense of giving in, but in the sense of refusal of the kind of economic and political realities that have brought us to that situation. So I feel like um, I see it less in institution building, though again, um, I'm less in touch with really the youngest um, register of artists in New York, but I haven't heard of so much going on that level. But I do think that there is a widespread effort at trying to think about how to refuse the conditions that we live in and how to make other kinds of conditions. So it's a kind of almost I mean, I do agree that art is a kind of project of imagination and invention that is really important because if you can't imagine another way, then you can't fight for it. Um, so even though these things might seem very small and isolated, I think they're essential. It's a way of keeping alive a certain kind of thinking, which is also incredibly, I don't know how you all feel about the kind of AI digital um, worlds, but in the US, there is this kind of hysteria around AI now, both positive and negative. And also, it's causing, what many people think of as a kind of economic bubble, because despite the fact that the underlying economic health of the country is maybe not so good, the stock market keeps going up, and it's partly, many people believe it's because of the investment that in AI. And I do think that AI, even though I saw and wrote about an exhibition in Paris that um, tried to give a kind of lay out a territory for AI as an artistic practice, I actually think that it's the antithesis of art. Um, I think, we need art more and more because people are going to be in this kind of world of, I don't know, generating what's already been in a slightly new shape. But
Are there many artists actually who work with, well, critically with AI? Because, well, I visited São Paulo Biennial this
mhm.
year, and I found out that they kind of refuse to work with modern or contemporary technologies, and there was this even institutional, uh, not a demand, but a certain curatorial gesture to ask artists to use, well, traditional materials, so to
Huh.
say. So even those artists who worked with, well, technologically savvy things, well, they opted for more for warmer materials, so to say. And I see the same things happening in Moscow, at least, well, in Russia, broadly speaking. So no, well, this is surprising. So art has dropped being on in the avant-garde of technological development and now is focusing on warm materials, so to say, on
hmm
community building and so on. Is the situation different in the US? I mean, is well the technological the topic of well, this cutting edge technologies an object of artist scrutiny?
Yeah, I don't think that there are a lot of really interesting artists using AI here. People got interested in NFTs. In the show that I mentioned, the curator Antonio Samani made an interesting distinction between what he called analytic use of AI, which was, kind of critical forms of trying to understand the structure of AI. So artists like Trevor Paglen or Hito Steyerl, who are working in a more critical way about how this form of vision is, creates markets, forms of oppression, stereotypes, biases, etc. And then they're what he called synthetic. He was taking up the language of how Cubism is often understood as having an analytic period and a synthetic period. So the synthetic was the use of generative AI, and those artists, I think, to me, were less interesting in general. There's a certain kind of look of glossy, kind of distorted images. There's uh, a French artist named Gregory Chatonsky who is interesting and has talked about a kind of fourth dimension of AI, of memory. But I think no, I mean, I think you're right that there's been a kind of compensatory move toward the tactile and the physical. Because honestly, in what I've seen, and I have tried to inform myself, they're not, you want a work of art to sustain your attention and thinking over a period of time. And there's something about that screen generation that doesn't really do that. Um, that kind of is off-putting rather than drawing you in. I think that also with regard to new technologies, it's really interesting to me because I've worked on video art and I do think that video, when it was a new technology in the late 60s, was a very generative one for artists. I think the internet maybe was less generative and maybe AI even less. And I've given a little thought to this, not a lot, but I think that one of the reasons might be is that the technologies are so um, already programmed, you know, and it's so hard to intervene in the programming um, that it doesn't give you a lot of space to operate. Um, you know, a video camera is a pretty simple tool compared to AI, and you can wreck it and use it wrong and, use it for purposes it wasn't meant to be used for in ways that are, I think, harder to do than with generative AI. So I think that artists, I mean, you guys are artists, many of you, if not all of you, so you know better than I, but I think, you want to use tools that aren't already fully programmed, because what's the point of that? Um, and I think maybe that's why um, AI doesn't seem as productive a tool as others, maybe technological tools have. But also, it took, a long time for instance, photography to be considered an art. And so maybe there will be amazing things in this technology as it matures. Who knows?
Mhm. Well, following the topic of the AI, you've written about the way museums will increasingly function as data repositories
Hmm.
and through the exhibition type of open storage, right? Or archival visibility and forms of, well, infrastructural display. But I wanted to kind of comment on, and well, give a light comment on that in context where censorship restricts what can be explicitly curated. Such models sometimes become the only viable way to show certain works without compromising institutional integrity, so to say. So
Hmm.
while kind of effectively shifting part of the curator, because curator is always culpable, here, and it's a very dangerous position to hold. So by doing that, by doing this open work, you kind of shift part of the curatorial agency onto the viewer. And yes, there are limitations of this strategy which are quite evident. But well, yeah, so I wanted to kind of reintroduce the topic that you covered in your book, and maybe ask your perspective on how you see the future of such search or archive or storage-driven exhibition formats, especially in environments where well, political pressure shapes what can and cannot be said. Because,
Yeah,
well,
that's
it's a question for us as well. Because, well, I know that this year, well, the Victoria and Albert Museum opened their grand open storage, and one of the contemporary art museums in Moscow is now. They said no to exhibitions. They just stopped the exhibition activity, but they're now having an open archive, so to say,
mm,
open storage, like a gesture of their own. So, and well, nobody's very clear in Russia what to think about it. How can we take it as a political gesture? So,
yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I'm Thank you for bringing that up. I've been intrigued by open storage for a long time. You know, it started in anthropological museums as an effort to give access to collections that were not accessible. So on one base, and then it has grown, I think, into this, I think, a kind of museum building type that is more or less global. There's one opening in Seoul, or at least there's one in development there. That will bring together three different collections. There's one in Rotterdam. I actually saw the one in London last fall. And okay, one thing that is a kind of grounding condition of this is that so much of what a museum has is not accessible to the public. So there is this way in which it's meant to be a gesture of access. So I guess the question would be, and it sounds like the Moscow situation, which is very interesting to me, might also be a kind of gesture of access. So then the question is this access kind of efficacious? You know, is it actually giving access, or is it kind of performing access? And I think, and probably it's not one or the other, right? It's probably doing both, as your question about censorship suggests. I think one of the things I try to do as a critic or scholar is to notice things that maybe I think are regrettable, but try not to judge them um, until trying to understand them a little bit. So I think one thing that's really interesting about this open storage is it indicates a shift in authority from the curator to the viewer to some degree. And again, partly that's performative because the curator is still, or curators are still laying out things and arranging them for the viewer. But it also gives a really different view of what histories of objects or histories of art are. You know, instead of there being a narrative that is authoritative, there is the invitation to take pathways through them, literally to navigate, because almost always these museums, in my experience, have a digital tool that is used to help you um, give you information about what you're seeing, because often you're just seeing a bunch of works together and you may not know what they are. Interestingly, also, there's a longer history of this, which I'm forgetting the name of the ethnographic museum at Oxford University, but the Pitt Rivers Museum, which was organized in either the late 19th or early 20th century. Sorry, I don't remember dates so well, but it's an older anthropological museum that's very much set up from the start as open storage. So it's kind of like a research collection. So I think that it's interesting that the model pre-existed to some degree, or was contemporaneous with the model of the museum, the art museum that we know, um, that now has taken it up. So I guess the question that really interests me here is how does this building type or collection strategy correspond to a new perspective on history in general? And you could, some sort of crude preliminary comments could be, well, it's like the Internet of Things, right? Like everything's accessible and you can search it out. Um, that may be too simplistic, but it begins to suggest that history is constituted by the viewer, not by a kind of succession of movements or something like that. And so that interests me. The kind of issue of access interests me. I think that when I visited the one in Rotterdam, which shows you the storage areas, I think most of them do. You can see the conservators working. You can see people bringing um, art in crates in order to be shipped. And I thought of it as a kind of spectacle or theater of logistics, which also is kind of interesting to think about people, you know, paying money in that case, because the Rotterdam, the Boymans van Beuningen had an entry fee. The V&A is free. Um, to sort of see this how this kind of physical quality of how art is moved in and out and conserved. So the art object is understood as having a kind of life of circulation that is quite different from when you see it in a in a standard museum where it's, you're not supposed to touch it, it's there forever, it's got a label next to it, etc. So again, I mean, I think like my attitude about taking photographs in museums, selfies in museums, I think it's both there are reasons to be cynical about it and there are reasons to be really interested in it too, because it demonstrates a new model of spectatorship and a new model of history.
Thank you, David. And maybe I can also share a particular piece from Russian museum or counter museum practice to make things clear. Personally, I only see hope for Russia in self-organized art in the underground scene, especially. But shortly before this meeting, I mean,
Mhm.
Kirill, Ilya, another organizer, and I discussed what we are going to talk about with you, and a metaphor came to my mind. It was inspired by the gay actionism of the last century, particularly the work of David Wojnarowicz.
Mhm.
It is a metaphor for a bleeding wound. This wound is interesting because it is hyperbodily. It is very real and, in a particular sense, brutal. It is too much for one's eyes to bear, I mean, and personally, I cannot imagine a wound being associated with contemporary American art. Trauma, yes, but not a wound that is so gaping and fleshy. It is wild, crude, and immoral, extremely forbidden. And of course, blood, which is flowing from this wound, overwhelming everything around it. You being to choke on it and lose consciousness. And art in a wartime, in the time of a real hot war, should be tragic, painful, and maybe formless, like this. And it is performative yet impossible to express, quite a paradox. And this blood should spatter faces and hands. That is a particular symbolism on the hands of those responsible for crimes against humanity, and at the same time, it should be on the faces of those who are not afraid of blood, for whom this blood will become a battle color. And I'm particularly drawn to this concept as demonstrated by a fairly large exhibition that lasted just one evening at the Moscow Museum of Modern Art, MoMA. So you know, this is one of the most official contemporary art museums in Moscow, and it was a young curator's exhibition supported by major art museums and magazines. Its name was Sublime Citizens. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about this exhibition. The Beaumont had gathered as always, and it was a very bohemian place. It was during a wartime in 2022. Yes, it was summer, and but it was the objects that were strange, say queer. They were empty frames, stands, and mirrors, accompanied by captions stating that there could be artwork here. In other words, there is no artwork here, but there could be. However, it is not here for a reason that cannot be named, and it was amazing for me. I call this performative invisibility when something is not present in a given space, yet simultaneously performs its absence as visibly as possible. Why can't we can talk about it a little bit when some topics are forbidden, but we still can say about the this forbiddenness, about this ban, making some unspeakable things, some impossible things, visible and speakable. Yeah. Just an example came to
Yeah.
mind after your expression.
Yeah. I mean, that your whole description of this and of David Wojnarowicz is very moving. I mean, he was working, as you know, during a period of, you know, during the period of AIDS, early period of AIDS in New York, and when there was, there was oppressive invisibility in the sense that the government, wouldn't admit and wouldn't help. And so I think there it's interesting that was a war. And, as a gay man of more or less David Wojnarowicz's generation, I think, I don't remember exactly how old he is, but we're, more or less the same age. I mean, if he were alive. That period really, you described it well. I mean, in terms of how it felt. And I don't know why people don't feel that way now. I can't give you an answer. I don't know that it's a sense of isolation after the pandemic or a sense that there's no point or a selling out. I just don't know because you're very right that I agree with everything you said, and I don't see that in the context I live in, there's passionate resistance and despair, and people are doing things that they can in various ways, but there hasn't been a kind of concerted, high impact artistic response like what you've described. And I just don't really, I don't know why. I wish I had an answer.
I have a wild guess that, well,
Good.
at least in the framework of Russian context, um, but maybe not only Russian, is that well, partly maybe because of the COVID. At least what the part of the section of art that I saw turned to a kind of reparative work
Hmm.
more than critical work.
Hmm.
So, of course, these two tracks are, well, kind of synchronized, they are simultaneous, they don't push each other out, but still, well, artwork as this place for contemplation, magic, well, kind of mutual support, reparation of some sort has become more or less prominent. Well, I remember this Riga biennial of 2020, well, during COVID years, and it was all devoted to reparation, poetics, and so on.
Mhm.
So enchantment, well, art as magic, so to say. And I see this, well, going on afterwards. And so, well, this kind of is a bit related to the question I wanted to ask, again, with a certain introduction to the context, small one. Because, well, Kolya is really right in the way that there is no transgressive art or critical art happening, at least in Russia. Well, that would be reactive to the tragedies that, well, are straightforwardly reactive and opposing to the tragedies that are ongoing. So it kind of reframes its function in a different way. And what is more prevalent or outstanding today is the role of the art market actually in Russia. I know that probably in the US, well, art market has always been, well, kind of booming, so to say. Well, there are ups and downs and so on. But in Russia, well, the institutional framework, it has never been strong. Well, we have never had a large, like, solid institutional basis. But well, following the border closures and the broader, like, economic pivot after the full-scale invasion toward domestic production, well, the Russian art market has entered a period of unprecedented growth. And most of nonprofit organizations were withdrawn, and many foundations, non-commercial foundations, shut down because of the restrictions on foreign agents, so to say. So the institutional framework that supported non-commercial art has almost shut down. Well, with very few exceptions that can't provide the support for the artists, for the, like, full support for the artists. So the only players who stayed in the field are small and large art galleries, all of them commercial, more or less. Non-profit art spaces, but these non-profit art spaces are chiefly located in artists' own apartments, just like the small institution, the self-organization that invited us, Osimi. So it's an apartment actually, but galleries now and collectors, private collectors, are so-called the avant-garde of Russian art today.
Mm.
So, the entire ecosystem is now sustained almost exclusively by commercial galleries, and this has a huge impact on the way art looks now. So it's very object-oriented, which is surprising. These spheres, like commercial art galleries and nonprofit spaces, are intermingled and interconnected because most of the artists belong to both. And they want to sell their art in these commercial galleries while having their own, more or less, non-commercial type of exhibitions in private spaces. So, and selling works within Russia, whether through art fairs or private transactions, has become more profitable than ever, although the art market is not like super booming, but still it's something. And the most prominent event of the year are art fairs, not big exhibitions like in previous years, like 5 years ago, but art fairs. I wanted to ask, well, of course, whether there were any changes in the art market in the United States and globally to your thinking,
Mhm.
Maybe in the aftermath of the COVID pandemic, or just in recent years. So, are we kind of in line with the global trends, or is it just a very local situation that we're having?
Yeah, I mean that is really interesting. I mean, it might also have to do with there being a lot of excess wealth that people want to park in something they think will have value and increase in value. I don't follow the art market systematically, but I will make a few comments about that. I think it is a different situation that you're describing from what's happening here, because I think that, as I mentioned before, the larger galleries are becoming more prominent, and smaller galleries um, are kind of going out of business. So it's harder to sell art that isn't blue chip. Um, and also, I've noticed that a lot of the art that's being made, there's a lot of painting, and I like painting, but a lot of not so great painting, and in my view. So I think, they're catering to a kind of, let's say, I don't know who the market is, honestly, but probably not people who are deeply committed to following art otherwise. But I've read some accounts that suggest that art as an asset class, which is partly why um, the art market boomed for so many years, has been losing some of its appeal in favor of other forms of investment, alternative investment like cryptocurrencies and et cetera. Then, you'll read articles that say that the new, the new gilded era, the new super rich are of Silicon Valley, et cetera, are not interested in this kind of philanthropy. They're interested in other forms of demonstrating their wealth that don't have to do with art so much. And I can't really, these are explanations I've seen. It does seem clear that the art market is reorganizing, is more conservative, and is consolidating around blue chip. Um, but um, other than that, yeah, I'm not quite sure. But we'll see. I do think it was kind of a bubble the way people were buying art at such a, the art fairs, etc., at such a huge speed and scale that maybe was not sustainable. So to me, I mean, I think artists should definitely not feel ashamed of making a living, and that I hope that, artists can do that. But on the other hand, I think that the markets reorganizing and cooling off a little bit might not be a bad thing here, because it's so skewed, and it's really, it it's focused on demonstrating that value will increase, which is always a gamble with works of art anyway. But it means that you emphasize on artists that it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You make a market for an artist, and then you enhance that market by getting more people to buy that artist's work. And, so it's kind of a bubble economy. And it doesn't have a lot to do with the values that I would say probably most of us on this call care about most, which have to do with art's philosophical, political, aesthetic value, and not just its monetary value. So um, we'll see. I mean, everything feels like it's in some state of possible change and collapse from my perspective here in New York, but it's sort of unclear what the outcome will be.
Thank you, David. Probably we will go to another part of our meeting, and we will have questions from our visitors. Дорогие коллеги, вы можете задавать вопросы. Вот. В целом можно отключить звук и задать вопрос. Либо, если вы боитесь задавать его на английском и хотите, чтобы мы помогли вам, вы можете написать его в комментариях, ну, в чате, и мы, Лера или Коля, переведут его. Ждем ваших вопросов. We have no one. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course.
My question is referred to my own practice, and it is about topic of non-human them, in the contemporary art, and my concerns are about the actuality of with them. Was them of the question of non-human, a little curious experiment which went to its end because of the actual catastrophes, political nonsense, and totalization in the several countries, in the several main actors in the arena of world. And so do we need to return to the subject, return to the logics of responsibility now, and or we could continue go deep in go deeper to the matters of objects, their own logics, and this path could be productive and rich in some specific way. I'm sorry for the incoherence of my speech. I'm a little bit embarrassed.
Oh, don't be. I think I understand your question regarding the responsibility toward the non-human world. Yes. And I mean, I think actually it's interesting. I've been thinking about this in the seminar I'm teaching now, where we've been thinking about responses to the Anthropocene in the last few weeks to climate change. And I really do think that many of the reasons why, markets and war, etc., can happen without the kinds of responses we've been talking about is that the non-human world is cut off from the human and not respected, or we feel no responsibility toward it. So I think that practice is very important. And I actually think that the artists I'm most interested in New York now are working in ways maybe not exactly along the lines you were describing, but in ways parallel to it. I think our minds, the hysteria around AI in this country, I think is an example of how our imaginations have gotten channeled so narrowly into a certain way of defining what is human, what is non-human, and that we have to focus on reimagining these relationships. I mean, climate change, war, all of the things that we're focusing on, these wars are happening, or the militarization is happening because a small number of people have learned how to appropriate vast amounts of the resources of the world. And it's just, I mean, something has to be done. And part of what has to be done is reimagining the worldview that to go back to Kolya's question, that allows this to happen without us all being entirely enraged and saying this isn't right. This isn't, what the earth is for. This isn't what, you know, we have a responsibility of a different sort. So yes, I think, what you're working on, it sounds like to me, is crucially important.
Thank you,
Thank you.
David. I'll do my best in this field.
Thank you. We have a question. Lera, can you probably, or Paulina, can you say it in loud, like in voice for this question, or we have to do this?
Oh, sorry, I'm outside and I don't have a great internet, so I wrote it in the chat if it's okay. Maybe some of you can read it aloud, or I don't know, maybe you can.
Okay.
I can help you out so that in the recording that will be present as well. Thank you so much for this important conversation. It's an honor to be here and to listen to this discussion. You're such a big influence and inspiration. We've talked today about many emerging themes and shifting artistic contexts. I'd love to ask, what has been capturing your personal attention recently? What are the topics that touch you the most on a more individual level? And also, the idea of the global outworld has been challenged in recent years. Do you think we are moving toward a more fragmented landscape, or do you see new forms of global interconnectedness emerging? Thank you again. Great question.
Okay, thank you for those questions. The first, I guess what I've been trying to think about is questions of history and time and how we can think about human history, environmental history, biological history together, and how we can think about the acceleration that happens in our world through the kind of digital rhythms that we operate within. So I'm trying to think about history a lot, and it's a hard subject because it's such a big subject and it's sort of hard to grasp sometimes. It sort of slips through your fingers. But those artists that I've mentioned a few times have been I've always really been interested in sound bleed, how in an exhibition that might have a sound component, it moves from the work that the sound is part of into other parts of the gallery. I've been thinking about eye bleed or vision bleed as well, and how images might do the same. It's very abstract, but I'm trying to configure a real subject around some of these things, and it's somewhat difficult, and it's also the current affairs are very distracting as well. So with regard to globalization, it is definitely things have changed in some ways, but you can't just undo infrastructural relations that were many years in the making. So one of the ways of as we've discussed, both from the Russian and the US context, one of the ways of asserting power and authority and attracting power is to propose boundaries in what is essentially has become, in many ways, an unboundaried world, an unbounded world. So power, being able to establish a boundary has also always been an enormously powerful capacity. But I think we're seeing this play out, when you are talking about the responses in Russia, for instance, um, to limits on foreign interaction, a reorientation toward the global south. The US has drawn inward, has reoriented, has taken a militaristic stance as opposed to a diplomatic stance. These are about the power of boundedness, and exploiting the fear of migration, etc. And I think we'll see all of this in a context where, in fact, the interdependencies of globalization have not been eliminated. So that means that there'll be, and climate change means that there'll be many more climate migrants in the future. So it's kind of an explosive combination, right? Of a world that is structurally global, but effectively policed in terms of boundaries to a much greater degree than much of the period of globalization's establishment. Though, of course, there were always boundary guarding, and especially with regard to impoverished immigrants. But it's at a different level now, and I think we'll see how that plays out in the next decade. It's definitely going to lead to more war, I think, and it might also lead to economic um, consequences. But there might be, globalization wasn't all good, obviously, and there might be ways that its partial dismantling will have positive effects too. I think it's too early to see that.
Thank you. I have another question from Carney, probably Kolya, can you? We will switch to.
Yeah, question from Corney, of course. Should I read it out loud? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry. Thanks so much, Carney says. In your work, you argue that images gain political power through their circulation and their capacity to structure networks of visibility. How do you see the current global right-wing turn in the United States, Russia, and elsewhere reshaping these networks? More specifically, are we witnessing an consolidation of authoritarian image regimes that reorganize visibility itself? And if so, what kind of artistic or institutional protocols could resist or rewire these increasingly closed circuits of attention?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do think that circulation has obviously been um, foreclosed in many ways. Though again, as I mentioned a moment ago with regard to globalization, those networks haven't stopped operating. They just don't feel as effective or convincing as they once were. I think that there is a way in which the Trump administration has been very productive in creating its own visuality, both from, the transformation of the Oval Office into a different kind, the presidential office into this kind of gold encrusted, decorated thing. He's proposed a garden of American heroes, which would be a sculpture garden with something like 200 monuments in it. So I think that those image regimes have been self-consciously consolidated and also a modality of constant acceleration and disorder. So he escalates. Instead of solving a problem, he escalates. So I think what he's done is accelerate and distort image circulation toward a kind of goal of disordered attention. What I think, what interests me about what artists are doing now, and I think I mentioned this before, is a certain kind of refusal. I mean, this goes back to that question of visibility and invisibility. How do you make refusal visible? And I think in some ways, and what is refusal? Is refusal to conform to norms? Is it a refusal of a certain set of policies? I think that instead of assertions of political statements, I think this posture of refusal has some possibility. But again, these are really difficult questions. And um, I think that we'll be seeing all kinds of different artistic projects in the next few years, and that it will probably become clearer which ones of them feel efficacious and which don't.
Thank you. Probably someone. Okay.
Sorry, a little one.
Yeah, of course.
I was very interested in the recent decree of Trump about the brand new requirements in the American governmental architecture. And what I'm interested of is will always reducement of freedom in this concrete example, architecture will this reducement expand the spheres of art and the modes of American cultural representation, etc. So will with strange and eccentric decorate will be expanded, and will it be formed a new pool of old-fashioned American artists, designers, architects, and so on, associated with conservative government. And could this situation be expanded to the other societies, other countries, and other regimes?
I don't, maybe this is just my wish or my desire, but I don't think that what they're doing, Trump, he has a style that he likes, and he's playing with the White House, putting this new banquet hall on it and decorating it with gold, etc. But I don't think he's a real patron of the arts. There's not, I mean, I know he's not. I don't think, in fact, this will have much of an effect beyond the White House. So I mean, there might be a conservative turn because the market will get more conservative, and there does seem to be a relationship, but I don't think it will be driven by his taste, because he's not interested in being a tastemaker, and I don't think that there's really that much appetite. I mean, what's funny, I mean, this is just partly silly, but there is a body type that has been popularized by the MAGA, the Trump world among women, that with the Botox lips and a certain kind of style that Jeff Bezos's new wife also, Lauren Sanchez, also has. So I feel like in terms of embodiment, yes, there's a Trump style, but in terms of architecture and art, I don't think there will be. I mean, I hope I'm right, but I don't think there will be.
Thank you. I have another question from Courtney, probably Lera. We will.
Okay. If an artist can choose refusal as a gesture that opens a new path, does this mean that political resistance itself can still function as a shared ground for contemporary artistic practice? Or, on the contrary, should we be looking for forms of artistic action that move away from explicit political optics and instead generate alternative regimes of perception and visibility, ones that operate precisely where resistance is no longer recognizable as a resistance?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and I have nothing to add to it. I think yes, because I think that at least in the US, directly political dialogue has gotten so debased. I mean, it's just like, teenage children fighting. It has nothing to do with values or etc. And I think it should be displaced as opposed to affirmed. So yeah, I mean, I in general have a preference for art's function as creating alternative modes of visuality. So yes, I think, I'm not an artist, but if I were, that's what I would be attempting to do. And as a critic, that's what I'm always on the look for. So thank you.
Thank you, Courtney, for your question. We probably have 5 minutes to next questions, and we will finish this conversation. Yeah. I'm sad. We don't have any other one. Okay. Probably, or we can finish it, Lera, David, Kolya. What do you think? If we have.
I just want to say that it was great, and I'd like to thank all of us, especially David and Lera and Kirill and all of the participants, OSIMI, for the organization of this fantastic meeting.
Yes, thank you. I really, really enjoyed it and learned a lot. And it's very inspiring to feel in touch with communities of artists who are far away, but we can have a dialogue nonetheless. So it's very inspiring, and thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it's unbelievable what we can have as dialogue in 3 different cities and 2 different continents of I don't know, 9 hours between us, like a gap between. Yeah, it's really sad, but we have the same situation right now.
Mm.
What we saw in this dialogue, but I hope we will be great and everything gonna be better and the best what we can imagine. Yeah, thank you, David. I don't know, unbelievable. It's amazing what we can have this dialogue, what we can discuss in this small platform like Sculpt Me, like a small artist trans space. And thank you, Lera. Thank you, Kola, for your help. It's really, really, really important. And I forget any words in English.
Thank you
And
very much
Yeah,
for
join
this
you.
conversation.
Thank you all. Thank
Thank
you,
you very
Lera,
much,
Спасибо
David.
всем
Kolya,
остальным.
Thank you for the
Kirill.
conversation.
Yeah, it
Yep.
was really enjoyable and thought-provoking. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. It was very nice to listen to you and join everybody. It's very nice.
Yeah, and thank you, all visitors, what we have today, what would come to us and spend 2 hours to be with us and listen our questions and answers in English with no translation. It's really important for us, but we can have this big meeting event and so on. So yeah,
Thanks. It was a
again.
little bit difficult, but possible. Very nice that you speak not so fast, and it was possible to catch some words and something was missed. But I hope that guys will make some translation in later, and it will be nice.
Yeah, of course we will translate all this event and we will have a text in English,
Great.
in Russia, English or the same.
Okay,
So yeah.
thank you very much for organization.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So
Good night, everyone.
yeah,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
have a good day,
Goodbye.
David.
You
Yeah,
too.
goodbye.